Hello, pop culture fans. This is Pop Culture Guy. Today is the very first retrospective video we're going to hear. It's on Batman the Animated Series. And this is good because this year is the 30th anniversary of the show. I thought it would be a great chance to start doing a regular analysis and in-depth discussion on the various pop culture IP and the genre. Now, because with probably the most iconic, beloved animated series of superhero genre, this show has helped a lot. This show has helped a lot alongside with Tim Burton's Batman films, so many Batman popularity in pop culture history. The show did an amazing job balancing the dark tone, mature writing, and thematic consistency compared to previous superhero cartoon shows I've seen in my youth. Plus, any superhero shows have been produced in recently. In addition, it helps that this show is borrowing key components from comics, but also the Burton films, particularly the music from Danny Elfman, and then the production design from the late great Anton Frost. This show gave the best artistic presentation with a sense of film noir aesthetics, which is good. It gives the show a lot of the detective feeling that Batman is known for, or being a detective. Now, of course, with the voice acting, Kevin Conroy, Mark Hamill, Arlene Sargent, Dan Carson, and the talented voice cast did a terrific job bringing these DC-related characters. Some of them has become the definitive voice for the characters for many people, like myself. Now, the score from Shirley Walker is fantastic. It keeps the familiar sound from Danny Elfman's score for the Tim Burton Batman films, but injecting with more energy and noir and slash jazz feel to score for the show. The show did a great job of modernizing its main character, which is good. Now, let's start doing our top 30 favorite episodes of the show. So, no further ado, let's get into my ranking of Batman the Animated Series 30 episodes ranking. Now, and number 30 is Girls' Night. This one is my favorite out of the new season of the new Batman Adventures. Now, of course, it's low because I think it's nothing that special or very complex or in-depth. It's just a fun episode of seeing Batgirl teaming up with Supergirl and seeing the villain of Poison Ivy and Holland Queen teaming up with my favorite superhero villain, Livewire. I think this is a good episode, and I think it really is just a fun Saturday night cartoon episode with seeing the girl power in full swing. So, is that my number 30 top list? Then, number 29, Showdown. Now, Ra's al Ghul was introduced later in the series, around season 2, and I think the show did a really good job of showcasing Ra's al Ghul and his hugely influential in the Batman comics. Showdown is a good third episode, I would say, where we had this really cool epical episode of Ra's telling Bruce the story of a Western tale of him being encountered with another DC-related character, Jonah Hex. I think this is a great episode, and I really love the Western epical story throughout this episode, and I think it's really neat. And also, there's a twist at the end of the episode why we're seeing this whole epical and Ra's picking up this person that we see in the beginning. But as always, I think this is a pretty much not top tier episode, but I think it's one that is worthy in the 30 ranking list. Is at my number 29. 28 is The Legends of the Dark Knight. Legends of the Dark Knight is such a great episode. It's a homage to the various pop culture or decades of Batman in the 50s, 40s, and the 80s. I really love this episode because I love at the beginning. Pretty much Paul Dini and Bruce Timm pretty much acknowledges the creators of Dick's Brand, Bill Finger, and Frank Miller at the beginning of this episode. It's really great. I love the segments of this Batman Animated Series episode. Legends of the Dark Knight have two segments. One is the 40s for Dick's Brand, where there's the Joker episode where he's trying to steal some sort of mystical note from the Zack Clown fame in the pop culture. And then, of course, we got the Frank Miller inspired Dark Knight Returns segment, which I really love. Now, as at my 28, I think it's still charming, but I don't like much of the third segment where Firefly
not that, but overall, it's a fun episode. And with the kids telling these stories, I think it's pretty amazing. At number 27 is Double Talk. For 27, Double Talk is the first in the list of rehabilitation stories for the show. These rehabilitation shows stories. No. For 27 in the ranking is Double Talk. For 27, Double Talk is the first in the list of rehabilitation stories for this show. These stories showcase various back rows re-entering the society but fail to adjust to normal life they once had. Double Tug is one of the few that has a happy ending for one of the bat rogues. Arnold, the ventriloquist wrestler, the dummy in the show, the monster one, has been able to keep his Scarface personality at bay for 6 months. But when he's released from Arkham, he begins to hear and see his dummy self everywhere. Luckily, he has a guardian angel on his side, and Batman can figure out who is manipulating Whisker before he gets into too much trouble. This episode is a fantastic episode that's able to capture an emotional punch of the strongest stories in Batman animated series. A Hitchhiking suspense thriller where it's unclear if the threat is inside Whisker or not. The direction in this episode also seems to be more cinematic than past few episodes in season 4. Reason being at 27 in the ranking, there's better interesting rehabilitation stories of Batman animated series, and this one for me is a nice happy ending for a back row, and it's a good psychological look of Arnold Rescue that struggles against his other half, that is Scarface. Now, 26, Eternal Youth. Poison Ivy returns to the show in her second appearance, Eternal Youth, pushing Gotham's elite for the crimes against nature by inviting them to her therapeutic spot, then turning them into trees. Poison Ivy is my favorite Batman villain among the Batman rogues. I think the BATS version of Poison Ivy is everyone, including me, the definitive version of Poison Ivy in the media. Her second episode in the show is very good, like her villain plot, turning the gritty Gotham elite that is harming the earth, plants, or environment into trees is scary and a sick plot from Poison Ivy. Another reason I love this episode is also a few exception of being a rare Afron spotlight. Afron is a great character in the Batman mythos, and Burstyn tries to flesh out his personal life by introducing a love interest in Maggie Page. Burstyn is one of the writers in the show. She she's only make the begging page. It only makes one appearance in this show. It's nice to see Afro loosen up through. I could like to see more of Maggie in this show because we need to use more strong female characters from the comics or new original characters. It could have been nice to have one that's eccentric without being villain. Now, the reason that being 26 in the ranking is there's two other personally Ivy-centric episodes that I like more, and this one is a good return episode for the character to branch out more fantastical and feel evil plots later in the series. At 25 is Cold Comfort. Mr. Freeze is one of the most sympathetic characters in the series, a tragic villain who wants to see the world experience the same suffering he's endured. Following the events of Batman Mr. Freeze Sub-Zero, a direct-to-video movie that was supposed to tie into Batman Robin, the Arnold Schwarzenegger film where he makes ice puns. Nora Freeze is alive and well, but Victor chooses never to see her again, and she marries her doctor. To make matters worse, Victor's body has frozen into the point where it's begun to breaking down, leaving his head as the only functional part of his old self. With nothing left to fight for, Mr. Freeze goes on a rampage through Gotham City, destroying the life's works of other noble Gotham figures so that they can feel the cold stain he always lives with. The character of Mr. Freeze is one that changed drastically with the revamp. Now, I don't like some of the revamp they do. I don't mind his redesigned sign look. I like the black and silver look. It definitely gives him that very cold and villainous appearance. But I think the idea of giving him cut off his head to be a spiral-like head is definitely weird and just really unnecessary. But I think it is necessary to get his one and last appearance in the DCU in Batman Beyond. Of course, his last appearance there in Meltdown. Now, despite the changes in the character, I think one thing that still works is Michael Arison's voice work for Mr. Freeze is still spot on as always. This episode couldn't have been successful without his hollow, haunting readings. The absence of the emotion in Arison's voice reveals the desperate loneliness of a man trapped in a cage of his own creation. When he was fighting to save Nora, he took the strength from the cold, but now that she's permanently out of his life, the cold has begun to consume and destroy Mr. Freeze. He lost his heart and in his body, and all he has left is his icy mind, which is telling him that Gotham needs to suffer as he is, which is really a good plot, and I think that's one of the things I like about Cold Comfort. Is it's definitely one of the most traditional villain plots for Mr. Freeze, and he's right down as a supervillain in this episode. Now, Comfort being at 25 in my ranking is a good spot because stated this is out of the DC AU Freeze's appearance is his most traditional supervillain plot. But there's two other Freeze centric episodes that I think are better and really represent Freeze as a sympathetic character. 24. The Last Laugh. The Last Laugh is Joker's second appearance in the show for me. The Last Laugh is the Joker second appearance for the show. And for me, it's a decent Batman episode. Batman stopping the Joker Man Plan episode in the show, which is fine for me. This EP served as a reminder that Batman is still a Saturday morning cartoon, and that not every episode is going to be psychological in this section of a tragic pop culture icon. This episode looks great. I like the highlights of being Batman, tracing of a Captain Clown, the Batbull's laser rescue, and touching Batman after the Batman and Alfred relationship, petite moment that further builds the bonds between those two. I appreciate all of this. I also appreciate Hamill's effort in this episode. He is able to make the Joker generally funny. This episode is mostly Hamill spawning one-liners to fill in the substantive plot in this episode. The reason being at 24 in the ranking is it's a fun episode with fantastic visuals and a great score by Cheryl Walker. Definitely my favorite of the soundtrack of Batman the Animated Series. But it's the least in-depth, spectacular episode of a Joker episode in this series as a whole. At number 23, it's Never Fear. The new Batman Adventure has its first great episode with Never Fear, a story that turns Scarecrow into the show's most terrifying villain. And not just because the dramatic costume design. Dr. Jonathan Crane is back to exploit the fears of Gotham citizens, but rather than amplifying their horrors, his new goal is to eliminate the fear and send the city plunging into chaos. Scarecrow is one of my favorite characters in the Batman Rose Gallery. He's number 3rd after Poison Ivy and, of course, the Joker. With the help of the motivation speaker he has under his wing, his Never Fear formula, Scarecrow is going to expose the locals to a gas that removes their worries and fears that they have to do whatever their hearts desire. For one man, that means swinging between Gotham villains like Batman. Out of the Batman Rose Gallery, I think Scarecrow receives the most significant change in the appearance in the show, with the revamp transforming from a lanky man in rags with a tail sack over his head to a hangman creature with a skull for a face. Now that's just terrifying. There's nothing goofy about this incarnation of this villain. He's now a walking nightmare, and his plot to destroy Gotham by removing the city's fear is, very spectacular and just one of the most daring plots that a villain has for Gotham City. Gotham is afraid to build into its very foundation and taking the way that could lead to intimate devastation. Even worse, Gotham's protector, who uses fear as the most powerful weapon, could be unable to put a stop to it. The thing is really elevating this episode is what it reveals. What it reveals. The best part about this episode is definitely Jeffrey Combs' voice. The readings that he really sell the Scarecrow. And what's so happy for me is that they brought him back to voice the Question a couple of years later in Justice League Unlimited. Now, the reason is at number 23 for me is that there's two other centric Scarecrow episodes that are better than this episode, unfortunately. Alright, number 22, Baby Doll. Baby Doll is one of the most heartbreaking 22 minutes of the children's television you ever wanted to watch. As a kid, I didn't always latch onto the deeper emotional themes of this series when I was a little kid. Explosion, butchering was what I really wanted in my Saturday cartoon mornings. This is one of the first episodes where a human story took precedent over the superhero one, which is good. Baby Doll is just visually chilling because of its foundation, especially in this depiction of a childhood star, whose life after stardom is less than ideal. Think about it. Carrie Coleman, part Shirley Temple, Mary Della isn't that far-fetched of a villain, even if she has a ridiculous, cutest visual, I guess. A lot of the realism comes from Alison Lepex's amazing voice acting, and the shifts from Baby Doll's high-pitched squeak to Mary's summer grounded speaking voice are the episode's most chilling moments. Mary delivers the saddest monologues to the side of Victor Freeze, and the tragedy of this episode is that she probably could be praised for her Lady Macbeth if she looked like the woman that she appears in the funhouse mirror. Now, the reason is that my ranking at number 22, I think there's other human stories that the show also has that are way better. I think Baby Doll is just too far of a concept that people like as a human story, or in this case, a tragedy story. Now, at 20, Chemistry. One of the series' most Bruce Wayne heavy episodes, and pretty much the last of the DCAU Poison Ivy centric episodes. This is a personal side story that could be further developed to give a better idea of how Poison Ivy's motivation affects Bruce. But I think it's a good standard superior narrative because it is edited by a few horror movie moments that brings out the script's creepy side, which is good. While most of the Gotham rogues have it out for Batman, Poison Ivy, interestingly, is always attacking Bruce Wayne for some reason. Now, I think it's because she doesn't know too much about Batman, but for Bruce, she knows him because he's an elite, just like every Gotham elite she's targeting to. And in Chemistry, but Bruce is just one of the Gothamists that is truly a good person, but being paired with a green-eyed Barkley human who will inherit a massive fortune when her husband dies in boxing. It's an interesting plot, but I wish it was delved into more plot. The reason I like this episode more is because it's horror-based kind of feel to it. Now, this is pretty much a secondary best Poison Ivy episode for me. There's one that outbeats it the most. 19, The Demon's Quest, two-parter. From the very opening moments, it's clear that The Demon's Quest is pretty much unlike any episode that preceded in BATS. A direct adaptation of The Daughter of the Demon from Batman 232, June of 1971, and The Demon Lives Again, Batman 244, September of 1972. Both by Daniel O'Neill and Neil Adams. Part 1 covers Rachel Gold's first appearance, Daughter of the Demon, in Batman 223, or Batman 232, sorry about that, and a shirtless fight epic that's from The Demon's Life. The Demon Lives Again from Batman 244 is the focus of the second part. The writer of the original comic stories, Dennis O'Neill, handles writing the duties of two-parters of this two-parter Demon Quest in the Batman animated series. O'Neill does a great job of closeness to the source material, but also alternates some of the things that was maybe hunky from the comics, but better in the cartoon medium. Now, for me, Demon's Quest is one of the best adaptations attempted by the series thus far. Maybe close second could be The Laughing Fish or Two-Face Origin, but heck, I think the plot is a huge departure from what comes before it. Rachel Gould is one of my favorite characters in the Batman Rogues story. Again, fourth after Scarecrow, Poison Ivy, and the Joker. He's a deeply terrifying and critical mastermind character from some of the Batman's more colorful roles. This is a man who is smart enough to deduce Batman's identity by looking at his receipts, and he wants to wipe out the third of the world's population, and he has satellite to make that happen. This is a villainy on an epic scale. I think this episode really showcased what makes Ra's al Ghul a great character, and one, we see him later in the live-action films that also has a similar motivation, but different. Now, the reason this is at 19 in my ranking, that I like this character the most, I think his BATS appearance were pretty good, but it doesn't reach the heights that Batman the Animated Series villains episodes are just astoundingly great overall. So, that's my overall opinion. Okay, at number 18, Mad Love. Mad Love is recounting Harley's origin. Just like Harley and Ivy, this did a fantastic job of showing the abusive relationship between Harley and her main man, the Joker. But Mad Love is where we see the full extent of their dysfunctional relationship. Going back to the Joker's first encounter with Harley Quinn in Arkham Asylum in the early years of Batman and Joker's fighting of Gotham City. As we previously seen in the series, Joker loves to prey on the weak-willed people, and when the eager Harley arrives for the new psychology job, he begins to sink in his hooks and so that he he can manipulate her wherever he fits. Best makes this episode great is voiced by Harley's voice actress, Arlene Sargent's outstanding voice work, and she shows remarkably range as she moves from the Harleen to the Harley in this episode, which is fantastic. Now, the reason is at number 18 for me is that despite how much people really love this episode, I don't think it's the best in the series because every time we see the Harley and Joker relationship, it's sometimes inconsistent, or for me, we need to explore more of their dysfunctional and Bruce relation more in the series. But never again, it's a great episode and is it at number 18 on my rankings. Oh my god. At 17, I Am the Knight. I love a good Batman psych violation, and I Am the Knight explores the burdensome pressure that Bruce's mission puts on him, taking him to the breaking point with his alter ego. On the anniversary of his parents' murder, Bruce experienced the crisis of faith when Commissioner Gordon is shot, and the episode evokes memories of the Mask of the Phantasm as Bruce considers abandoning the promise he made to defend the Gotham City. Some might consider this episode overdramatic, but for me, it's rather operatic, with the writer Michael Reeves and director Bob Kirkland emphasizing the epic scale of Batman's mission and Bruce's limits as a human being. This is why I like Batman. Batman is DC's greatest hero because he's a human being. This episode shows Bruce's flaws and fears, but it also reveals the strength and endurance that keeps us endured to him. Bruce's sense of honor and duty is extreme, that he pushes himself to the limits and then a little further beyond. And this episode shows what happens when his mind just can't handle the stress any longer. The trauma of Gordon shooting on top of the anniversary of his parents' death pushes Batman into frenzy, and he throws a tantrum in the cave, which is funny, but it is sad because he's trying his best to keep his city safe. Connery gives an outstanding performance in this episode, going through a huge spectrum of emotions and wailing after his Batcave breakdown is heartbreaking. For me, this is a great episode. Despite not being in top 10, I think it's still a great episode from Batman and series, and this is why it's at 17 for me in my ranking. 16. Harley's Holiday. The second Harley-centric episode in the series, with the previous Harley Quinn spotlight, Holland Queen, expanded on her relation with Joker. Harley's Holiday is another rehabilitation story. It delves into the relationship between Harley, Batman, and Bruce Wayne. Paul Dini is the show's best writer in this show. He does everything great, exploring the Batman's roles, psychology, and depth. When it comes to making Bruce a pivotal part of the story, he draws precisely poignant connections between the boy billionaire and the clown princess. Holland Queen Criswell, or Harleen Criswell, was a good person before she caught up in Batman's mess, and Bruce feels directly responsible for her descent into insanity. Batman decides to be a little more proactive in helping Harley with her rehabilitation and offers some words of encouragement that perfectly encapsulate the Harley and Batman dynamic. Now, I really like the line, "I know what it's like to try and rebuild life. I have a bad day too." Once. That's such a great way, and it shows us outside Batman. That's what we're rarely seeing nowadays. It reminds us that Batman is fighting for all Gotham's people. And he puts behind bars as well. He hands Harley the dress that caused all the episode's trouble and gives her hope for the future, which is really touching. And this is why he's at number 16. 15. Dreams and Darkness. Scarecrow wants to contaminate Gotham's water so he can study the widespread effects of fear, a plot very similar to that of Batman Begins, and his constant drive to learn that makes him different from the other rogues. Fear is an incredible powerful emotion, and as the knowledge of the emotion grows, his appearance changes to become more terrifying. What truly makes this episode stand out is the brilliant dream sequences. Watch it first to see how it's awesome. The visual detail behind the shape-shifting, the fear that each character talks about, the feeling of helplessness in Batman's eyes is truly terrifying, but also exhilarating. And when you watch this episode, it feels like a grateful dread concept, maybe, or Led Zeppelin. I love all this. I love all the Scarecrow episodes. This one is no exception, especially with the start where we find Batman is being disturbed and put in Arkham Asylum. The story is great, the dialogue is great, but in this case, for every single episode in this episode, it's 15 in my ranking. Number 14, A Bullet for Bullet. Now, Bullet for Bullet is a comic book adaptation from the Bullet for Bullet number 14. A Bullet for Bullet. This is a comic book adaptation of Batman in a series based on the Chuck Dixon Hard-Boiled Detective Comics 651, an adaptation that made significant changes to enhance the emotional tension. Writer Michael Reeves stick closely to the source material for the story. Dialogue and the tone of this episode is fantastic, and it also follows the Grant Nolan's art from the comic, which is really great. The creative team dedication to adapting Dixon's story faithfully is really outstanding. Now, this is based on the 651 Detective Comics and features narration from Bullock, which is somewhat absent from this episode. But the series has done a great job of the voiceover narration effectively, like Dream in Darkness previously from the episode ranking. But also the music is fantastic here. It evoked the answer of these post stories really great, with Harvey R. Cohen teaming up with Sherry Walker, turning into a really great score with a jazz influence to it. This gives this episode style and energy, which is great. It begins with the horns and progresses as Bullet gets run down by a mystery assailant in an alleyway. It then smoothly transitions into Batman's theme when Bullet turns to him for help. Now, this is probably one of the best Bullock-centric episodes in the series, and I love it. It's at number 14 in my ranking, which is good. At number 13, The Laughing Fish. The Joker has given the fish in Gotham Harbor his face, threatens to kill the bureaucrats one by one until they let him have the copyright. Now, this is how you do an adaptation. Combining two of my favorite classic Batman tales from Danny O'Neill and Neil Adams' run, The Joker's Five-Way Revenge from Batman 251, and Steve Englehart and Marshall Rogers' title of this episode, The Laughing Fish, from Detective Comics 475. The Laughing Fish features the most terrifying Joker ever. Paul Dini's script and Bruce Timm's direction and spotlight on Mark Hamill's brilliant, insane Joker really elevates this episode as the definitive best Joker episode for me. Paul Dini knows how to make the Joker scary, following up on Joker's favor as well, with a script that showcased Joker's penchant for comedic terrorizing, ideal involving innocent bystanders. The legitimate danger Joker represents prevents the absurd plot from becoming completely camp, and the visual spectacle Tim brings to the episode makes this one of the strong adaptations of the series. As one of my favorite Joker episodes, it's at number 13, and I really like this position, so it's in my ranking of 13. At number 12, Riddler's Reform. The Riddler has given up crime to make and sell toys, but if he's gone straight, why does Batman read clues to future crimes in the Riddler's advertisements? The Riddler has been the most iconic back role in the Batman Rogues Gallery, and he debuted in the show late in the run, and has great 3 appearances in the show. But out of the 3 appearances, Riddler Reforms is his very best in the Batman animated series show. Riddler's last appearance on the Batman animated series is also his best as Edward Nygma. Tries to give up a life of crime and fails miserably. The season has worked in a lot of redemption stories, as I mentioned previously in this ranking, and it's one of the most relatable plots to go for returning villains. Edward Nygma isn't a prime creature like Catwoman or Killer Croc, or the more insane criminals like Harley Quinn or the um, Arnold Riskler, Scarface, but it's his brain that prevents him from becoming a functional member of society. He has an ego, and that's what makes Edward Nygma so fascinating as a character. He wants to outsmart everyone, including Batman. When Nygma is released from Arkham Asylum for good behavior, he tries to go legitimate by selling his persona as the Riddler and puzzle technology to a wacko toy corporation for a multi-million-dollar contract. Despite his wealth, though, Riddler can't resist the thrill of the chase, and he continues to try to finally stump Batman, a assassin that has become the driving force in Nygma's life. Out of all the rogues, why is it so easy for Riddler to fluctuate between good and bad? Well, Paul Dini himself, who co-wrote this episode story with Alan Burnett and Randy Roger, who continued to play with the idea of the reformed Riddler in his detective comics as well, later in life. But also, I think this is also inspiration from another famous Riddler story, The Remarkable Rules of the Riddler, that also depicts Riddler reform but cannot stay out of the criminal life as well. It's an angle for the character that works surprisingly well in every adaptation. Unlike most Batman villains, Enigma doesn't seem to have the same kind of general hatred for all mankind. He desires to see others suffer. He wants to be the smartest person in the room, and he could be, if it weren't for Batman being around to stop his overall goals in life. And for this, I think the Riddler's form being at number 12, well, the Riddler's form at being number 12 in my ranking is definitely a good spot. At number 11, Paging the Crime Doctor. BTAS does a great job of exploring most family-oriented episodes that doesn't focus on Batman's non-constant villains, which is the case for this number 11, Paging the Crime Doctor. This episode looks at the relationship between crime boss Robert Thorne and his brother Matthew Thorne. And this episode also further expand more Bruce Father's history with the crime doctor Matthew Thorne and Dr. Leslie Thompson as being friends to Bruce's father before his death. The series hasn't dealt with Tom as being a doctor, so this is why this episode is high in my list, because it's a great in-depth to see who Bruce's father was. A sharp contrast to the profession Bruce has chosen, and it doesn't say much here either. The emotional gut punch of this episode is the last line when Bruce begs Beth to tell me about my father, as Bruce say just what I say right now. Cameron Corrin kills, displaying the vulnerability where we haven't here before with Batman. Reminder that Batman is still a lost orphan boy looking for his parents and his father's approval. And this case, this is the best episode in Batman in the series for me, at number 11 in my rank. Okay, so now let's start with number 10. Of course, in my Batman Animated Series top 10 episode ranking, this one is House of the Garden. In Poison Ivy's third solo appearance in the show, roughly bachelors are being poisoned and robbed across Gotham City, but Batman's main subject appears to have turned a new leaf. Poison Ivy has been one of Batman's animated series' most reliable roles for entertaining episodes, and House of the Garden is her best and pretty much her tragic horror story, penned by Ivy's most fanboy enthusiast Paul Dini. Dini's greatest strength in this episode and his writing with the character in this episode is in exploring the metaphors underneath the rogue's gimmicks, and he approaches Poison Ivy from a different angle than her previous female retail appearances in the show. Reformed and happily married with a house in the suburbs, her husband's of two sons, Thelma Isley has given up her villainous career, but it's not all happy and, I say it, sort of barren life. Finally, finding happiness through the traditional family mold. In House in the Garden, Dini adds a new dimension to Isley with her newfound desire to have a family. Because of her hyper immune system, she's unable to have children. So, she hatches a elaborate and disturbing plan to make a family on her own terms. Just like all Batman rehabilitation stories, Poison Ivy cannot escape her true nature. She sees the opportunity to take control of the criminal profile of Stephen Clarkin, the person that let her out of Arkham Asylum, seducing him with her poison kiss, then keeping him in a tank while she uses the DNA to create plant duplicates, including her sons, that he doesn't have. This is my favorite Ivy episode. In the show, it gives you an interesting story about Ivy, who is trying to be a different person. The only way Ivy can support her life as a loving wife and mother is by poisoning and robbing men to gain money for her own desires and man-sizing experiments in the lab. This shows all Bat-Rogues struggle to adapt a noble life, and to end this note, it's for me, anyway, number 10 in my ranking, and one of my personal favorite Ivy episodes. Then, number 9, Santana. I love that all the DC superheroes to have its very first guest star on Batman the Animated Series. It's Santana, who is they chose. A obscure magic-based character, yes, she seems a bit odd to fit for Batman's more realistic street-level environment. But Paul Dini creates a connection to Bruce Wayne that gives her extra significance to the Batman mythos. Santana is one of my all-time favorite DC characters, number 6 in my ranking. It's probably because of this episode, it's number 9 in this list of loved episodes in the show. Dini's attention to the emotional life of his heroes keeps this episode from falling into typical Batman action episodes among the other ones, which is good, and that's why it's at number 9. At number 8, Holland Queen. When Joker threatens the city with an atomic bomb, Batman enlists Holland Queen's aid in helping track down the crown prince of crime, hijinks as they will ensure. Leave it to Poltini to spotlight one of everyone's favorite psychology turned psychopath, Holland Queen. In her first solo story, taking its time from the English, more slapstick interpretation of the Italians' Camarade Delute, Holland Queen is the first time we see what Harley can do on her own, untethered to Mr. J, aka the Joker or Poison Ivy. The traditional Holland Queen places the clown and the Holland Queen characters at forefront of the goofy romance plot. While the story might be considerably different, Dini's script keeps the slapstick analyst using his experience on Tiny Toons to turn in a hilarious episode with fill of visual gas. Also, Dini turns up the mad cat comedy in this episode to capitalize on the odd couple pairing of Batman and Harley and hijinks that Harley and Joker do in these episodes. And this, for a reason, is number 8. Number 7, Heart of Ice. It's arguably the central episode of Batman animated series. Heart of Ice did a tremendous job of reinventing Mr. Freeze for a whole new generation. Batman and his world is down to the obsolete assessment, making everything both essentially recognizable and still fresh and new at the same time. But Heart of Ice, which comes from the core team, the BTAS, Paul Dini, the writer, Bruce Timm, the director, went to the extra mile to reinvent Mr. Freeze completely. With a handful of comic book appearances, and his more biggest claim of fame was playing by 3 different actors from the 60s and a West TV show. Heart of Ice gave him a tragic backstory, a terrific creepy news sign from Hellboy creator Mike Mignola, and unforgettable vocal performance from Michael Essering, who completely brings the character to life. All the featured Mr. Freeze stories in comics or on the screen now takes the cues from this episode. Batman and the episodes create stories from the comic books, but Heart of Ice was the complete opposite of that. It was an original tale of a man who lost everything and wants revenge, but at the same time it had heart, humanity, and very nice villain reform. At number 6, Deep Freeze. On paper, Deep Freeze should be awful. First off, it's a sequel to the best episode of Batman in the series, Heart of Ice, written by, again, Paul Dini and Bruce Timm. And most disappointing by comparison, secondly, it's based on an urban legend about Walt Disney being frozen and that he's a villain and he wants to attempt to gain immortality. Now, this content sounds really awful and could have gone wrong, but the BST team pulled it off some maniacal way. Yet, magically, it's not awful. I should have more faith in Dini and Tim, because the Deep Freeze is one of the best episodes in the entire series. Stunning Pulp Fiction adventure that also contains possibly the most heartbreaking moment in the whole show, which is really saying something. One thing that makes Deep Freeze great is that it's the only episode which the supervillain, in this case Mr. Freeze, managed to stay with form. Actually, after watching every villain in the rehabilitation stories fail to go straight, the moment Freeze decides to sacrifice his own happiness in order to save the lives of others is extremely satisfying. Freeze's expressions often melts with sadness. Mike Anderson's acting here is another amazing one, capturing the voice of the man who uses his emotions to hide his inner torment, finding himself to be invulnerable. This is definitely, for me, anyway, outshines Heart of Ice, and it is a great Mr. Freeze episode for me, and his entire appearance in the DCAU. Number 5. From Chance to Dream. Bruce Wayne wakes up in a world where his parents never die. He's engaged to Selene Kyle, and someone else is Batman. I like these episodes. I love these episodes like Princess Dreams because I love the what if. What if the Waynes were never killed? Someone else becoming Batman? Could unstable Bruce attach himself to a fantasy life and kill himself when the real world wasn't satisfying enough? What is this episode end with a shot of Bruce at the bottom of that bell tower instead of Batman walking away from his latest victory? Well, you need to see this episode. It's really good. Kevin Conroy gives one of his best performances here, besides doing a triple duty as Bruce, Thomas Wayne, and evil Batman. Conroy gives such a joy in life to brief scenes where Bruce thinks that maybe, just maybe, he doesn't have to be a Cape Crusader. That Bruce sounds 10 years younger. Affleck is right. It is good to see Bruce in a good humor, but his joy is also the moment the illusion of his perfect life shatters. That much more heartbreaking. The Mad Hatter trapping Bruce Wayne in a dream of his perfect world feels like the Lauren Bright and Michael Reeves' reinterpretation of one of my favorite best Superman stories ever, the Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons for the Man Who Has Everything, which is once again shows Batman that the series picks up its influence from everywhere, and this is why it's at my number 5 in the rankings. Number 4, Second Chance. Second Chance is a great Two-Face episode that shows the impact that losing his best friend has had on Bruce. How important it is for him to have Dick/Robin as his eyes. Yes, sometimes the Joker might be occasionally the Batman rogue, but Two-Face is Bruce Wayne's personal and greatest enemy on the Batman in the series. By establishing the friendship between Bruce and Harvey Dent early in the series, the writers gave the exceedingly loyal Bruce a companion. Harvey was someone that kept him linked to the non-constant reality. The creation of Two-Face robbed him of that viable connection, turning Harvey into another reason for Bruce to don the cape and cowl and drift further from his humanity. That's really great. Second Chance sees the Bruce and Harvey relationship return to the forefront. Finally, Bruce sees the opportunity to revive his friendship when Harvey prepares for a surgery that will take away his evil other side. And this reason, this is my favorite Two-Face episode in the series, and this is why it's at number 4. Number 3, Appointment in Crime Alley. At 9 p.m. on the anniversary of Bruce Wayne's death of his parents, Will and Dead will blow up Crime Alley and kill everyone who lives there, unless Batman can discover and stop his plot in time. Now, this is one of my favorite parts about the animated series, is they do adapt comic stories and single graphic novels into their shows. The Appointment at Crime Alley is the first Batman animated series episodes to be based on a specific story. In this case, There is No Hope in Crime Alley by Dennis or by Denny O'Neil and Dick Griando. Like the source material, this episode introduced Leslie Thomas, one of my favorite characters in the Batman mythos. The socialite that comforted Bruce the night his parents were killed, whom he visits Crime Alley every time the anniversary pops up, the place of his parents' death every year on this anniversary. This is one of the greatest episodes for me that really examines Bruce's humanity and has a mother sector of Leslie Thomas there to support him. And this is why it's at number 3. Number 2, Trial. Trial is one of the most iconic episodes in Batman in the series. Not only Batman is being trapped by the villains of his rogues gallery in Arkham Asylum, and he's going to have a pretty much guerrilla trial with a attorney who doesn't like Batman. This is one of the great reasons that it's one of the most popular episodes that everyone's ranking of Batman in the series. Huge cast, callbacks to the previous episodes, focus on the psychology and philosophy make this episode highlight of the series. It's a shame that, for me, the trial is DA Jen Van Dorn's final appearance of the show. She was introduced back in the Shadow of the Bat 2-parter. That was where we introduced Batgirl there. Because she's a great foe to Batman, holding him to the same legal standard as everyone else. And interesting, she was voiced by Stephanie Semmelitz. She's the daughter of the Afrin of the show, which is insane. But anyway, Janet is an aggressive woman who is threatened by her dedication to legal justice, which is good. And she has no problem telling Batman that if he wants to support the law and order, he needs to take off his mask and put on a uniform. Bruce Timm and Paul Dini are marvelous when they do team up. They take advantage of the great cast of villains of the show and has pretty much developed an intense and funny episode in Batman in this series. And this is why it's at my number 2. And for finally, at my number 1, Beware of the Great Ghost. A series of bombings, copy of the plot of one of Bruce Wayne's favorite shows when he was a child. So Batman seeks the aid of the actor who played his childhood hero. A meta commentary ensues. Batman the Animated Series took elements from various sources and turned them into something definitive for the title character of Batman. And, in this case, Beware of the Great Ghost pays homage to those influences, from the fresher Superman shorts to the pole heroes like the Spirit and the Shadow. Throw in Anna West voicing the Simon Tent of the Great Ghost, and this episode goes in entirely different level of awesomeness for me. This is great. Seeing and teaming up with a costume hero that he really loves when he was a child, Batman takes him to the Batcave and shows him he has a fanboy closet, which is crazy for me to see a Batman who's literally a fanboy of this character, revealing how much of influence the Great Ghost has on his life. Trenton replies, which I really like this line, So it wasn't for all for nothing. That effect that these stories have for long after they've been told is what makes them special. And Jetson needs to be reminded of the gift he has given others before he can see the worth inside himself. This is truly great. And also, it's a great performance from Anna West. Having Anna West on Batman animated series is a glorious meaning of two worlds. Even better, it's an episode smartly written and gorgeously animated at the same time. Much like Anna West, by fully accepting the mask that he used to wear, Simon Trenton can find new success in honoring these stories that influenced their series. The creators made timeless tribute to the classic crime heroes, crafting one of the show's best episodes in the process. And one of my personal number one in my rankings overall.